I think it's time the dinosaurs made room for evolution. Dalton sneered, lips twitching in that tick-tock smirk he probably practiced in the mirror every morning while brushing his veneers with oat milk and hubris. The conference room fell into a vacuum. I mean vacuum, no air, no noise, just the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant echo of someone's dignity being publicly incinerated. Alina sat motionless, spine straight like steel rebar. The rest of the department tried to pretend they hadn't just witnessed a live beheading. No one coughed. No one blinked. The quarterly update slides froze on screen behind Dalton's bobblehead, half hidden behind a stack of overpriced branded notebooks. He insisted the company order to boost creative synergy. This is a new era, he continued, pacing like a TED talkascapy. We need agile thinkers, not relics of Cold War coding structures. Effective immediately, Alina Crane is no longer with the company. No one clapped. They just existed, or pretended to. Michelle from compliance suddenly found her coffee very interesting. Jerome, the dev lead, stared straight ahead, his jaw twitching like he wanted to say something, but remembered the last poor bastard who stood up to Dalton got reassigned to AI chatbot onboarding. For squirrels. Alina didn't flinch. She didn't stand. She didn't sputter, plead, perform the shocked how could you people always expect in these public purgings. Instead, she blinked slowly, almost sympathetically, like she was watching a child proudly eat a crayon and announce it was pizza. Dalton cleared his throat, sensing the absence of drama wasn't the climax he imagined. You'll be escorted out by HR following this meeting. Your access will be revoked by end of day. She raised her phone, thumb flicking the screen without a word. Ding popped into the air like a trigger pulled. Her calendar read, Military Briefing 11:30 a.m. location. Secure conference room 4C Level 2 clearance required attendees. LT, call, Rias, CMDR. Zhang E. Crane for the briefest second. Something in Alina's eyes flickered, not panic, not shame. Something cooler, heavier. The kind of calm a bomb squad tech wears right before snipping a red wire. She stood, slowly, deliberately, gathered her portfolio. Not a single paperclip out of place. Her badge still clipped to her blazer. Not one button misaligned. She was immaculate as always. Am I allowed to collect my personal items? She asked quietly. Dalton blinked, thrown off. Yes, of course, someone from HR, no need. I'm capable. She turned, her low heels tapping against the tile like a metronome, measuring the beat of everyone else's guilt. When she reached the door, she stopped, turned slightly. Just enough to catch Dalton in her peripheral. You should really double-check who has clearance for which floors before throwing your little tantrums, Xavier. Then she left, just like that. The moment the door shut behind her, the room finally breathed again, shallow, nervous gulps. No one dared whisper, but everyone thought the same thing. What the hell just happened? Dalton, looking more confused than victorious, mumbled something about let's keep moving, but the presentation was already dead. Alina's absence was a crater. Out in the hallway, she paused only once, just long enough to glance at her phone again. 11:11 a.m. Plenty of time to make it to the lobby. They'd be arriving any minute, and they wouldn't be asking for Xavier Dalton. The elevator dinged like a church bell for the doomed, and Alina stepped out into the sterile, over-perfumed lobby. Her fake peace lilies in fingerprint-smudged planters pretended to breathe life into a building that was hemorrhaging competence. Her box was small. One framed photo of her dog, a 1999 Defense Systems mug with a chipped lip, and a manila folder containing exactly one document, a signed clearance log. She didn't linger, didn't weep at the sight of the front desk, didn't give the security cameras the satisfaction of catching emotion. Her feet moved steady, hurried like someone headed into surgery, just not the one being cut open. At 11:26, right on Pentagon precise time, the front doors parted like a scene from a bad Cold War movie. Two men entered, one in navy dress blues, the other in the starched olive of the U.S. Army, no smiles, no pleasantries, no briefcases, just eyes like sonar and posture like steel beams. The receptionist, girl with a pink scrunchie and an ask me about our culture code. Button, froze mid-scroll through some influencer's salad pic on Instagram. Dalton was already there. Of course he was. Puffed up like a rooster on caffeine, arms spread like he'd summoned them through sheer vision board manifestation. His voice rang out too loud in the glass box of a lobby, rehearsed and tone-deaf. Gentlemen, welcome to Genodyne Tech. Xavier Dalton, Director of Strategy and Integration. You're so honored to have. Where is Alina Crane? The Army officer cut him off flat, not blinking. Dalton's smile hiccuped but didn't die. Ah, yes, Alina. Unfortunately, she's recently transitioned out of the company. But no worries. I've been fully briefed. The Navy man turned to the receptionist. Is Alina Crane on site? Before the poor girl could answer, Alina stepped forward, box under one arm, blazer still crisp. They're here for me, she said, voice calm as a weather app. They won't brief anyone without me. Dalton turned like a cartoon villain, realizing the bomb had been under his chair all along. Alina, let's not make a scene. This isn't a scene, she said. This is protocol. You'd know that if you'd read anything besides fast company blog posts. The Navy officer stepped beside her like a shadow. Miss Crane, if you're ready. I am. They didn't wait. Flanked her like a presidential detail and walked toward the restricted corridor. The security panel blinked red at Dalton, who tried to follow. Alina didn't even look back as she passed her badge over the sensor. Green light, door unlocked. She stepped through. Dalton stood outside, flapping like a dad locked out of a Tesla he didn't know how to start. Wait, hold on, she's not an employee anymore. She can't have access. From inside, Alina turned, finally meeting his eyes through the glass. I am the sole point of contact for Project Cloud Veil, she said calmly. The only one with level 2 clearance. You terminated that access when you fired me. Then, to the officers, if you'd like to reschedule the briefing under a different employer, I'm open to options. The Army officer's mouth didn't move, but his eyebrow twitched just enough to suggest interest. Dalton's color faded into the same beige as the lobby tiles. Door hissed shut between them. On the other side, the military officials guided her into a secure elevator that required a thumbprint and retina scan. As the lift began its quiet descent into the sublevels, where firewalls weren't just metaphorical, Alina finally let her lips curl. Just barely. She didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Not with the humiliation still drying on her skin like cold sweat. But somewhere between the second and third sub-basement floors, flicker of something woke up. Cold satisfaction. And the realization that the clock had just started ticking for Xavier Dalton. Upstairs, in conference room B, the one with the ridiculous LED collaboration halo that Dalton insisted on installing to boost creative morale, chaos blossomed like mold in a forgotten lunchbox. The screen was blank. The military briefing deck hadn't launched. The projector refused access. Black window blinked. Access denied, user not authorized. Dalton tapped the keyboard harder, as if brute force could outwit government encryption. His jaw was clenched so tight the vein in his temple looked like it was about to file a complaint. Behind him, the senior systems analyst whispered into her headset, then looked up pale. Sir, the DoD interface won't initialize. Their team says you're not recognized in the contract database. Dalton spun on her. What? It's impossible. I'm the acting director. Doesn't matter, said Jerome from DevOps, arms folded, voice barely hiding the contempt he'd kept under wraps since Dalton's arrival. The access tree is tied to security clearances, not job titles. Alina was the root node. You terminated her without a transfer or override. Dalton's eyes scanned the room like a man searching for a fire exit in a submarine. Okay, call her. Just call her. Get her back up here. I'll fix this. He pulled out his phone, smacking the screen like it owed him loyalty. The dial tone rang once, twice, 3 times. Alina saw the call. Her phone lit up on the secure conference table beside her government-issued folder. She didn't even glance at it. The Army officer, CMDR. Zhang looked over mildly. Need to take that? No, she said, voice even, just noise. She let it ring. Then she silenced it. Upstairs, Dalton was still gripping his phone like he was threatening it into submission. She didn't pick up. She'll call back. She has to. No one in the room agreed out loud. But a quiet current began to move through the team, like wind shifting before a storm. Michelle from compliance, who'd stayed silent for years under 3 regimes of managers, spoke first. Did you seriously fire the only person with federal clearance before a Pentagon-level briefing? Dalton scoffed. It was insubordinate, resistant to change. We're integrating AI systems. We don't need outdated manual protocols. She built those protocols, said Jerome flatly, from scratch, before you even learned what a zero-trust model was. Yeah, someone else muttered. Did she write the whole logic spine for Project Cloud Veil in, like, 2016? A murmur spread like spilled coffee under a conference table. Heads nodding. Side eyes. Quiet, deliberate scrolling through LinkedIn profiles. Alina's face glowing softly from multiple screens. One particularly bold intern whispered to another, I heard she was on a first-name basis with someone from Homeland Security. Dalton tried to rally, slamming his hand on the table just loud enough to sound desperate. Look, she's gone. We need to move forward. Jerome, spin up the alternate environment. We'll route around her. Jerome didn't move. Environments on an encrypted subnet. Access permissions haven't been updated in months, and the passphrase is still set by a leaner. Dalton's throat worked like he was swallowing a dry screw. Well, brute force it, he snapped. You brute force a federal contract, and you'll be explaining that to a military tribunal, Michelle said. They'll come in here with men in suits and tape off the building. You'll be in the parking lot explaining data tampering to a guy named Agent Ross. Silence fell again. This time thicker, hotter. No one was smiling, not anymore. Dalton turned back to the screen. The words hadn't changed. Access denied, user not authorized. Somewhere deep beneath the floor, a leaner was in the middle of a quiet, orderly conversation with CMDR. Zhang and LT call Rias. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't venting. She was discussing policy continuity, mission assurance, and contractor transition pathways. Her voice remained steady, hands still. But inside, a slow pressure was releasing. Not triumph, not yet, just validation. Upstairs, her team, the ones she had mentored, fought for during budget cuts, covered for when deadlines slipped, were putting it together. They weren't dumb, they were engineers. And now they were seeing Dalton for what he was, a decorative wrecking ball in expensive shoes. The realization had begun. The unraveling wouldn't be far behind. By 4:00 p.m., Dalton was pacing through the executive wing like a man with a fire alarm strapped to his ego. He'd already called legal. Twice. Screamed at HR for procedural overreach. Tried bribing Jerome with stock options that hadn't even vested. But nothing was moving. Every path forward slammed face first into a digital wall a leaner had constructed years ago, back when she was quietly designing a skeleton key no one else knew existed. Didn't know that Project Cloud Veil's infrastructure wasn't just protected by clearance levels. A leaner had layered it like an onion dipped in acid. Embedded firewalls coded in precompiled scripts, dependency chains only she knew how to untangle, and a second-phase authentication system that referenced a physical token, which was currently locked in a biometric safe 3 stories underground and would self-wipe if tampered with. Dalton, naturally, tried to fast-track a new clearance. He called in a favor with a defense contractor friend from college who owed him for keeping quiet about a Vegas bachelor party in 2018. Didn't matter. Request denied. The response from the Department of Defense was so sterile it practically hissed. Subject Dalton, Xavier is not recognized under current program authorizations. All credential elevation requests for Project Cloud Veil must be routed through the existing primary contractor of record. Crane, Aliner M. Dalton threw his phone against a whiteboard. Downstairs, in the cool hush of sublevel 3, Aliner sat across from LT Call, Rias in a secure debriefing suite. The room was minimalist, steel table, 2 chairs, glass of water untouched, one flickering fluorescent overhead that made no apology for the buzz. Miss Crane, Is said, folding his hands on the table, you're aware the contract allows for reassignment of assets if the project's operational continuity is at risk. I'm aware, Alina replied. There's also language buried in Appendix G about continuity pathways outside of employer custody. Alina didn't flinch. You're saying I'm the asset, not the company. Rias gave the tiniest nod. We don't care where you sit, Miss Crane. We care that Cloud Veil works. Care that no one in Shanghai or Moscow gets their hands on it. She leaned back, quietly absorbing the offer underneath the euphemism. You're suggesting I walk, she said. I'm saying if you did, there'd be someone in DC ready to hold the door open. She didn't answer. Not yet, because power wasn't in grabbing the first life raft. It was in watching everyone else panic about whether you built the boat. By the time she returned home that evening, her inbox was already molting with invitations. Quick chat about strategic systems roles. Would love to get coffee, discreetly of course. We heard you're making moves. We'd like to be part of that conversation. Not one of them mentioned Dalton. They didn't need to. She opened a bottle of wine, just 1 glass. She wasn't celebrating yet. Instead, she pulled out her old moleskin notebook, one with faded graphite diagrams and coffee stains from years of midnight war rooms and lost weekends. She turned to the section labeled Post-Genodyne Exit Protocol. The plan was old, but not dead. She updated 3 pages, mapped out a contact tree, highlighted names she could trust, people who didn't flinch when things got classified, Engineers who didn't chase stock valuations or Slack emojis. She smiled at the name of one in particular. Carla, former protege, now 3 years deep at a cyber defense firm that didn't advertise its Pentagon ties, but definitely had them. Alina picked up her phone and tapped a message. You still looking to build something clean? Something quiet? The reply came 2 minutes later, hell yes. When do we start? Alina sat back, exhaled slowly, and looked out the window as dusk settled over the city like a secret no one had earned yet. She wasn't just moving on. She was setting the table. And she was choosing the menu. Dalton. He was still upstairs trying to log into a system that now recognized him as background noise. By the end of the week, the walls at Genodyne weren't just cracking, they were sweating. Missed deadlines began piling up like soggy post-it notes in a flood. AI module Dalton had promised would revolutionize operational throughput, failed its second integration test in a spectacular implosion that caused the test server to crash and spit out nothing but ASCII skulls. No one could explain it, but rumor had it the codebase had hard-coded references to deprecated endpoints, ones that had been migrated years ago under Alina's documentation, now mysteriously missing from the shared drive. Dalton blamed legacy dependencies. The engineers blamed Dalton. Project managers started whispering phrases like spiraling bottleneck and failure cascade. In meetings, no one made eye contact. Michelle from compliance updated her resume in plain sight. Then came the first escalation email from the due liaison. Not panicked, not hostile, just disappointed. Worse than angry. Requested urgent clarification on workflow adjustments post-asset transition, and asked why Genodyne had not yet submitted the mandatory Phase 2 security audit packet. Dalton, to no one's surprise, hadn't even known there was a Phase 2 packet. Alina had always submitted it, quietly, on time, in triplicate. The board called an emergency strategy huddle. They called it a vision sync, but everyone knew it was just damage control with muffins. Didn't help. The marketing lead, who'd never once met Alina but had inherited a cloud of second-hand reverence, slipped up during a team sync and said, "We're 3 weeks behind because someone fired the person holding the nuclear codes." No one laughed, not even Dalton. Then the whispers started. Quiet, paranoid, dangerous. Why was she fired? I heard she pushed back on the AI rollout. No, she flagged security issues, and Dalton didn't like being challenged. She had dinner with someone from the Pentagon last year. Not like a Pentagon official, like a top-level one. She had an old-school badge, someone else murmured, like metal, with a chip in it. Alina didn't need to fan the flames. They were doing fine on their own, but she wasn't idle either. She watched from a distance, linked in activity, internal leaks from trusted contacts, screenshots forwarded anonymously. One, from Jerome, simply read, "They're asking questions now. Loud ones?" That Friday night, 9:17 p.m., Carla, the same mentee she'd texted days earlier, got pulled into a confidential alignment chat with the board. It was in Conference Room D, where they held sensitive partner negotiations and rarely brought anyone under director level. Carla was 29, senior engineer, not an executive, not yet. They asked her what Alina really did, what she worked on, why she had clearance levels Dalton couldn't access, why the system, post-firing, was behaving like a grieving machine, functional but moody, locking files without warning, delaying syncs, refusing new integrations. They wanted context. Carla gave them a careful, quiet truth. Alina didn't just run the contract. She was the contract. She built Cloud Veil's architecture on protocols no one else could even explain without a map and a thesaurus. He didn't write manuals because she was the manual. The board sat frozen. Why did she document more thoroughly? One asked. She did, Carla said, in the private documentation vault, the one you need level 2 biometric clearance for, and you're saying we can't access it. I'm saying you need Alina's fingerprint and retinal scan, or an executive override key from the Pentagon. That one landed hard. Afterward, Carla texted Alina 3 words. They're unraveling fast. Alina read it in bed, in sweatpants, with her dog snoring at her feet and a half-drunk cup of green tea by the lamp. She allowed herself a small smile, not smug, just vindicated. She typed back, let them, because she wasn't done yet, not even close. Monday started with a bang, but not the celebratory kind. Not a champagne pop, more like a claymore mine to the gut of Genodyne's executive suite. At 8:42 a.m., the company's general counsel received a certified letter, not an email, not a ping, not a whisper from some junior analyst. A physical envelope, hand-delivered, with a due seal and an embedded verification chip on the flap. When they cracked it open in the presence of 2 witnesses and a trembling HR rep, first line read, "Formal notice of project lead noncompliance." By 9:06, the CFO had the letter on his desk. By 9:15, he was in Dalton's glass-walled office, the kind with the fake bonsai tree and a whiteboard that still had "Disrupt Legacy" thinking scribbled on it from his first week. "You need to tell me right now," the CFO said, voice flat as asphalt, "why the Department of Defense believes Alina Crane is still the active project lead on Cloud Veil." Dalton leaned back in his chair like a man hoping posture could make up for competence. "That must be a clerical error. We submitted new role assignments last week. They bounced them. Twice. Then legal must have. Legal hasn't even touched it, because the system won't allow them to. It's not just about logins, Dalton. Her name is burned into the contract metadata." Dalton opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "She didn't leave clean, okay? She left with access keys she shouldn't have had. You mean the keys she generated because she was the only one authorized to do so for 7 years. Dalton blinked. The CFO didn't. "Do you have any idea," he continued, slowly now, as if talking to a particularly stubborn toaster, "what happens when we're found noncompliant on a $300 million federal contract? You know how fast blacklisting happens in this space. Do you understand how little mercy Washington has for companies that screw with defense architecture?" Dalton stood, gesturing wide like a man drowning in his own pitch deck. "She's orchestrating this. She's undermining us. She hasn't said a word to the press. She hasn't even replied to our retraction letters. You fired her in front of her team. She just walked out the door." The CFO leaned in. Then the Pentagon followed her. By lunch, the boardroom smelled like fear masked with cinnamon air freshener. Directors who hadn't spoken up in months were now very interested in process transparency and workflow stability. Fingers started pointing. Legal blamed Ops. Ops blamed Dalton. Dalton blamed old culture rot. Nobody blamed Alina, because Alina wasn't there. She was across town in a sunlit cafe, sipping espresso with her laptop open to a quiet LinkedIn update. Alina M. Crane Advisor, Federal Systems Strategy Group. No fanfare, no headline post. Just a new line on a profile, clean and cold as a scalpel. The moment it went live, phones started buzzing. Not hers, theirs. Government contacts, defense consultants. A few panicked recruiters who realized too late they should have reached out before their competitors did. Back at Genodyne, Carla saw it first. She texted Jerome, "Check LinkedIn." She moved. Jerome replied with one word, "Shit." The CFO made a private call to a risk mitigation firm. One of the directors asked if they should disclose the inquiry to investors now or wait for the next quarterly. The general counsel opened a Google Doc titled Board Response Plan Emergency Draft. Dalton, meanwhile, sat alone in his office staring at his phone, scrolling through Alina's profile again and again. Her face didn't gloat, her headline didn't accuse, but it burned. Advisor to Federal Systems Strategy Group. In defense circles, that was the equivalent of God's unlisted number. He finally looked up and saw the reflection of himself in the glass, a man still pretending he had leverage, while the entire building around him was sinking into the bedrock she had once reinforced with her bare hands. Alina, she didn't smile. She did close her laptop, finish her espresso, and walk out the cafe with the sun on her back like a woman who'd already written the last page and mailed it to the people who thought they'd stolen her pen. The invitation came on a Thursday, not via email, not even through Alina's new government-side employer. It arrived by courier, hand-delivered in a matte black envelope with a return address that simply read, Room 237, the E-Ring, Pentagon. Inside, a single cream cardstock page embossed with an eagle. We request your presence for a closed-door strategy session concerning Project Cloud Veil. Your insights remain critical to national continuity. Friday, 1400 hours. Room 5E741. No frills, no ask, just expectation. Alina didn't need to call anyone to ask if it was real. She knew the tone, the cadence. It wasn't an invitation. It was gravity. Next morning, she wore navy, not black. Black meant war. Navy meant command. Her heels clicked like punctuation down the marble Pentagon halls, flanked by security who didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't ask for ID. She was in the system, deeper than Dalton ever dreamed of being. The room was nothing like Genodyne's boardrooms. No glass. No marketing slogans. Just wood-paneled silence, 4-star brass. Two men from the Office of Net Assessment, who looked like they'd survived 4 presidential administrations without changing their neckties. They didn't flatter her. They didn't apologize. "Miss Crane," one said, hands folded like stone, "we believe you're the only person who understands the full operational intent of Cloud Veil. You built it with enough abstraction that even we can't reverse engineer parts of the logic spine," the other added. "That's not a criticism. It's impressive." She inclined her head slightly. "I didn't build it for show. I built it for defense. We want you to finish what you started," the first one said. "From here, under us. No red tape, no legacy bureaucracy. We'll handle the contractor transitions." Alina folded her hands. "What happens to Genodyne?" A pause, a breath. "If they comply, they'll be permitted to supply Tier 3 support. If they resist, terminate the entire engagement and blacklist them from future contracts." She didn't blink, and Dalton, a longer pause. "Your replacement will not be him," came the reply. No malice, no fanfare. Just a subtle shifting of tectonic plates. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, Dalton stood in front of a generic Genodyne Step and Repeat banner, lying through his capped teeth to a local business news outlet. "We're in a period of transformation," he said, nodding at his own words like a bobblehead in heat. "Legacy systems often require disruption. The Pentagon recognizes our innovation, and we're aligned on all fronts." The reporter, fresh out of grad school, didn't press him, but even he could see the sweat beading at Dalton's hairline. Across LinkedIn, a different story was writing itself. Industry recruiters were comparing Alina's advisory move to a hostile corporate buyout. An anonymous source leaked that the DoD had flagged Genodyne as noncompliant pending remediation. A respected tech blog ran the headline, "Crane's Flight: How Genodyne's star engineer became the Pentagon's power move." By the time the Genodyne board received the official notice of potential contract termination, stamped and signed by a deputy undersecretary, Dalton was already on the phone with PR spinning words like pivotal moment and strategic inflection. The board wasn't buying anymore. They were fielding calls from institutional investors. They were reviewing indemnity clauses. They were emailing Alina's former team, one by one, asking if anyone else still had access to what Alina had locked behind 6 layers of cryptographic misdirection. They were realizing too late that there wasn't a fix. There was only her. Alina, now back in her DC suite overlooking the Potomac, didn't revel in any of it. No dancing on graves. No angry monologues into the mirror. Just silence, wine, and the knowledge that she hadn't needed revenge. She just stood still while the tide shifted. And now, everyone else was drowning in the wake she left behind. The email from Genodyne came at 6:03 a.m. on a Sunday. Subject line: Reinstatement Proposal, Urgent Sender. Chairman at Genodyne Corpcom. It was short, as if the shame of groveling made the fingers behind it tremble. Alina, in light of recent developments, the board of directors formally requests your return in a consulting capacity, with full access restored and compensation aligned with the strategic importance of your contributions. We would be grateful for a conversation at your earliest convenience. Respectfully, Alan F. Cordell, Chairman, Genodyne Technologies. She didn't respond immediately. He finished her walk with the dog, refilled his bowl, watered her plants. The house was still, sunlight creeping across the kitchen tile like a soft admission that time was on her side now. At 8:11 a.m., she replied, "Dear Mr. Cordell, I appreciate the gesture. At this time, I must respectfully decline. I've accepted another position. Wishing you clarity in the days ahead, E.M." Crane, she hit send. Exactly 17 minutes later, boardroom at Genodyne was in full panic. Dalton was on mute during the Zoom call, pretending to jot notes, while the rest of the directors took turns glaring at their own reflections. Then came the blow they weren't prepared for. A formal call, no paper this time, just the clear voice of LT Call Rios over speakerphone. "This is your final compliance advisory," he said, calm as a guillotine. "Project Cloud Veil is a national security asset. If Alina Crane is not reinstated immediately, and Mr. Dalton not removed from all supervisory functions, we will nullify the existing contract and reassign the program to alternate custodians." What does reassignment entail? One of the directors stammered. "It means we take the project, your reputation, and your future in defense contracting," Rios said, "and we leave you with press releases and subpoenas." The call ended. No one moved for a full 10 seconds. Then the chairman turned to Dalton. "You need to resign." Dalton stood slowly, like a man realizing the only thing left in the room was gravity. "You can't seriously be effective immediately. I built this roadmap. You needed disruption. You said you disrupted us into federal blacklisting." The CFO snapped. "We don't need disruption. We need to not go to prison." Dalton's badge was deactivated before he hit the parking garage. Back at Aliner's new office, technically a satellite advisory suite leased by a firm no one could find listed in any commercial registry, she stood overlooking the Anacostia River, watching the water slide past like time shaking off old names. She didn't feel smug. She didn't feel anything, really. Just complete. The door opened behind her. Carla stepped in, followed by Jerome and Michelle, her people, ones who knew the systems not from float charts, but from late nights and caffeine and long-haul trust. "Everyone signed," Carla said. "NDA, new contracts, were officially live." "Welcome to the new ecosystem," Aliner said, turning. Carla grinned. "You sure you don't want to call it Cloud Veil too?" Aliner shook her head. "We're not fixing what they broke. We're building something they'll never touch." She glanced at the secure screen behind her. Internal tracker pinged. 10 systems migrated. 0 errors. Full continuity. This wasn't just control, it was independence. Genodyne had begged. The Pentagon had demanded. Her team had followed not out of obligation, but loyalty. And she had delivered them somewhere no one could fire them from ever again. Aliner Crane no longer worked in the shadow of men like Dalton. She worked above them, out of reach, out of sight, and with a keycard that didn't need explaining. The press release hit the wires at 10 o'clock a.m. sharp. Polished, bland, forgettable by design, Genodyne Technologies announces a strategic leadership realignment. Effective immediately, Director of Strategy Xavier Dalton will be stepping back due to unforeseen health concerns. The board has appointed interim leadership to guide Genodyne through its next phase of innovation and compliance. No mention of federal threats. No hint of how close they came to implosion. Just a polite obituary for a man who still thought spreadsheets could outmaneuver protocol. Inside Genodyne, no one believed the health story. Dalton's office had been cleared before sunrise, his nameplate quietly scraped from the glass. No farewell email, no catered goodbye, just a note taped to the door, under transition do not disturb. The board met in hushed tones, no anger, just exhaustion. They weren't rebuilding now, were begging the world not to notice the cracks in their facade, were actually holes punched clean through by arrogance. Far from the corporate mausoleum, deep within a black-site federal compound that didn't appear on GPS, Aliner Crane walked through a reinforced checkpoint wearing a crisp navy blazer and a white plastic badge clipped to her lapel. It read simply, "Visitor Auth LVL2 Crane, E." Escorted full clearance, pre-approved. The guards didn't stop her. Nodded, one of them CMDR. Zhang gave a rare half-smile. "You know you don't need that badge anymore," he said. She glanced down at it, the word visitor stark against her breast pocket. "Not for them," she replied, "but it's a nice reminder." The hum of classified work surrounded her. Servers with no brands, screens with no logos, personnel who never asked for last names. This wasn't a job anymore. It was architecture. It was war conducted in silence. Passed through 3 more biometric doors and came to a long hallway lined with glass conference rooms. Inside the one at the end, room 7E, sat a familiar table, newly occupied by strangers. At the head of the table, a young woman in a Genodyne badge, her posture stiff with panic. Next to her, a man in a dark gray suit, a federal contractor, likely auditing them into a corner. Across from them, someone new, Dalton's replacement, an appointee. Crisp, nervous, trying not to sweat through his collar as Aliner entered frame. But she didn't walk into the room. She passed it, glanced in just enough to catch eyes. The new director of strategy froze, then gave a twitchy smile. Behind him, on the wall screen, the architecture map of Cloud Veil glowed, annotated, modified, but unmistakably hers. She didn't break stride. She reached the far wall, turned a corner, and vanished down the restricted corridor. He had another meeting in 4 minutes. A real one that mattered. And as the doors hissed shut behind her, the badge on her blazer caught the overhead light one last time, visitor. As if this place, this role, this quiet empire she'd orchestrated from ruin was still something she was just passing through. She didn't burn the bridge. She bought the whole damn river. And now she was upstream, reriding the current. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.